Advisory Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First, I'd like to do a roll call, and I'll start on my left end here.
Suzanne Wilson with East Bay Park, sitting in for Sean Dugan.
Eric Hugh, sitting in for Transpac.
Bill Pinkham, West County Rep.
Ole Olson, somebody likes me.
Excuse me, Paul Reinders, transplant rep.
And I'm Tony Phillips, and I'm from the Walnut Creek area, I guess.
All right, thank you. We'll go to item number 2, public comment. Does anybody have any comment on anything that's not on the agenda today? Okay, not seeing any. I'll go to item number 3, approval of the minutes. Approve the CBPAC minutes of September 24, 2018.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Reinders. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, second by Mr. Pinkham. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, that's approved. We'll go to item number 4, the San Pablo Avenue Multimodal Corridor Study. Receive an informational presentation regarding the project status.
Thank you, Robert. Chair, and thank you to the committee and the public. This item is a presentation from the Alameda County Transportation Commission, and we are fortunate to have Kathleen Sullivan, who is a principal transportation planner with ACTC, here to provide this informational update. And after this update, will be available for Q&A. But at the moment, we're going to try to make sure that the presentation is viewable on the screen. So please bear with us as we work through the technical aspect. Okay, we're ready to go. So Kathleen, I'll hand it over to you.
Great.
Actually, before you continue, we can't see it. Okay, now I can see it on the, thank you.
Like I can see it. That didn't help you very much. Oh, there we go. And did everyone get, there was both a packet and just a one-pager at the front. I just wanted to make sure everyone picked that up or that I came and gave it to you. That'll be helpful as I get into the concepts. So the San Pablo Avenue Corridor Project is a project being led by Alameda County Transportation Commission in partnership with Contra Costa Transportation Authority and WICTAC. So this is a multi-city, multi-county effort covering San Pablo Avenue from Oakland all the way up to Richmond, San Pablo area. So 7 cities. And this is basically building on an enormous amount of past planning work that has been done for San Pablo. There's a lot of plans that have been done by jurisdictions throughout the corridor. Some have been specific to certain modes, like bicycle plans or pedestrian plans. There have been major transit studies done on this corridor. And then there's been things like the San Pablo Avenue specific plan that El Cerrito is working on right now. So there's a lot of different planning that has gone on for the corridor, but nothing has looked at it as a whole. Generally, people are traveling not city by city or mode by mode. People use multiple modes and are traveling through multiple cities. So this is the first effort to look at all of the plans that have been made for the corridor and really kind of ground truthing them on the actual right-of-way that's available and what will actually fit and what are the real trade-offs between different modes and different design options when you look at how much right-of-way is actually available. So this is a really diverse corridor. Looking from Oakland all the way up to San Pablo, there's a lot of different land uses, a lot of different communities. The right-of-way changes significantly throughout the length of the corridor. It is also a corridor that has a couple other major transportation facilities available, which is BART, which primarily touches down El Cerrito and then gets a little bit further away from the corridor and then gets close again down in downtown Oakland, and then I-80, obviously. This project is really focused on the avenue itself and the surrounding streets, just a quarter, half mile on each side, but not really focused on I-80, while recognizing that that is obviously a major driver of travel within the corridor. There's a lot of growth planned along the corridor. Every single city from Oakland all the way up to San Pablo is has identified the area either immediately around or significantly around San Pablo as a priority development area. And there's a lot of growth actually happening already in the corridor today, with particular concentrations in the Emeryville, Oakland area, and then up in El Cerrito. Those are sort of the biggest concentrations, but there are some development proposals throughout the corridor and some construction that's already underway. So this is the official project purpose and goals. A couple of the primary focuses, this is a multimodal project, so we're looking at all the modes and improvements for all the modes. That growth, accommodating this growth that is happening and anticipated to continue to happen in the future is a primary driver. Both comfort, quality, and safety for all users of the corridor are key drivers. And also just recognizing the role that transportation plays in creating places and supporting land uses, helping economic development is also a key thing that we want to recognize. This is a street that is the front door to businesses, to people's homes. It's a main street in many communities, as well as sort of a thoroughfare as well, so that it's playing a lot of different roles. And so recognizing those different roles and the kind of main street quality that it has is also a really important piece we need to keep in mind as we're looking for design options in the future. We did a pretty robust existing conditions analysis. This is a very succinct summary of some of the key findings. Safety is a major issue on San Pablo for all modes. This is a high injury corridor for bicyclists, for pedestrians, and for automobiles. So there's a lot of conflicts that are happening on San Pablo. Auto performance is actually pretty good for an urban arterial. Autos have pretty reliable and fast travel speeds and times. The bus, on the other hand, is less reliable, particularly reliability of keeping sort of consistent headways between buses is a real problem. It has somewhat slower travel time than auto, but it also gets stuck in congestion, and then the buses bunch up, and so you get about 20 to 25% of buses arriving significantly behind the prior bus. They're supposed to arrive, the 72R is supposed to arrive about every 12 minutes, and about a quarter of buses are arriving significantly later than that. And a gap of 18 minutes is just not the kind of bus service you can walk out to the street and count on a bus showing up in 5 or 10 minutes. That gets to be pretty long wait times for people. So bus reliability is a major factor in some of the designs we're looking at. There's also significant loading activity throughout the corridor, both people loading and commercial loading. There's businesses that line parts of the corridor. Some are more residential, but there's many different business districts. And in many parts of the street, it immediately goes to relatively low-scale residential right off of San Pablo Avenue. So loading on side streets, if we were looking at some proposals, some of the proposals you'll see remove some of the parking. Loading on side streets in some areas is going to be problematic because having large trucks circulating through those residential neighborhoods is either impossible due to street widths and turning radiuses and things, or at least inappropriate, just inappropriate to have that kind of, trying to funnel that kind of traffic onto residential streets. There's also senior housing complexes where you need ADA pickups and drop-offs, so some of that loading activity is another key thing to just keep in mind in terms of the uses that are on San Pablo today. Crossing conditions is something we've heard a lot about. Pedestrians, sort of every user group, motorists, bicyclists, transit riders have all talked to us about pedestrian conditions and not feeling particularly safe walking on San Pablo and particularly crossing San Pablo. There aren't very many opportunities to cross. They're spaced pretty far apart, and a lot of them don't feel particularly safe to people, especially unsignalized crosswalks. It's also a challenge for bicyclists. So even in places where there's pretty good biking infrastructure off of San Pablo, people still need to get across the street. And getting across San Pablo by bicycle is challenging today. The final thing I'll mention is that we did an origin and destination analysis using sort of some aggregate data of GPS and things like that, and about just under a third of trips currently traveling on San Pablo today have no origin or destination in our study area. So they're using San Pablo as a convenient through route to get to other places, other neighborhoods, perhaps as an alternative to I-80, but also potentially making trips, neighborhood trips, but to other neighborhoods that are not immediately on the corridor. So looking at the future, with all this growth that is happening and projected to continue to happen, congestion is projected to get worse, and one of the biggest impacts of that is on the bus. The bus travel time in the future, if we do nothing, is projected to just about double by 2040. 2040 is sort of our planning horizon year that we've been looking at, and likely become even less reliable, because the more congestion, the more the bus really gets caught up in that, and reliability continues to degrade. So that's a major concern as we're looking forward, and one of the drivers of why we're trying to look at some options of what we might be able to do today to prevent that future for the bus. So I'm about to get into the concepts, which you have printed in your packet. A couple key things to just keep in mind when looking at these designs. We're only looking at utilizing existing curb-to-curb right-of-way. So we're not looking at taking sidewalk space and converting it to roadway space. So we're really just looking at curb-to-curb. Right now, the right-of-way varies between 70 and 96 feet. So it's pretty consistent around 73, 74 feet throughout Alameda County. Then it gets much wider in El Cerrito, all the way up to 96 feet in a couple segments. And then it gets all the way down to about 70 feet in parts of Richmond. So we are, the concepts you'll see before you are designed for 73 feet. That was sort of the best common denominator we could come up with. And I'll say at this stage, we are at a very conceptual level of design. So these are three kind of prototypical ideas of what the future of San Pablo could look like. There will be many future design phases where we will apply these prototypes to specific intersections and specific segments, because conditions, as I said, vary a lot. So these are trying to get from people sort of three alternative visions for where we might take the corridor, which of these are popular, which of them would even deserve to be advanced into a future more detailed phase of study. A couple other things to mention is that basic pedestrian improvements we are going to include in any alternative, because we have heard loud and clear that pedestrian safety and comfort is a major issue. And intersections are where a lot of the trade-offs really have to happen. There's a lot you can do mid-block, but the intersections is where all the demands are that really have to be balanced. So here are the three concepts, and then I'll go through each in a little bit more detail, but there's one that adds a bus and a bike lane to San Pablo and goes down to one travel lane in each direction. There's one that adds a bus lane and goes down to one traffic lane in each direction for most of the day and keeps parking on the side for the majority of parking and loading on the side. But during the afternoon peak period, when traffic is sort of the most congested, the curbside parking lane would convert to a travel lane to allow a little bit more auto capacity in that most congested afternoon time of the day. So that's concept B. Concept C maintains two mixed flow auto, bus, loading, truck lanes, and adds a bike lane on the side. So going through each one individually, and you can see these on the drawings in front of you. It might be a little bit easier to see on your 11 by 17 printouts. This is the one that adds bus and bike lanes. So the red lanes are in the middle of the street. We did look at a lot of different concepts, including side running bus lanes, but I landed on center running, at least at this conceptual design phase, because it's the one that yields the greatest benefit for the bus. Basically, you can achieve the greatest reliability and travel time savings for the bus if the bus are in the center of the street. So these would have center boarding platforms. You'll see the yellow in the center of the bus lanes, the kind of crosshatched yellow. That's the loading platforms for the buses. So you'll see the northbound bus is stopped on the far side, and the southbound bus is stopped on the near side of the street. On the side, you'll see a green stripe. That's the bike lane. That would be a protected bike lane, actually with some sort of vertical separation, so a class 4 protected bike lane. This design, by reallocating the right-of-way to these other uses, a lot of the parking would have to be removed, so there would be some mid-block loading and parking spaces that would remain on one side of the street. You can see those on the top side of the slide. That lighter gray is a handful of parking and loading spaces. But on the other side of the street, you can see that there's no parking or loading along that side of the street. The other thing to point out about this is at the station locations, which is on the right side of the slide there isn't room for both a right turn and a left turn lane. So in this diagram, we're showing that you preserve a right turn lane but would not have a left turn lane. So at major intersections, that would be a pretty major trade-off that you'd have to figure out, either offsetting the station, the bus station, from the major intersection so that you could provide a left turn, or preventing a left turn or prohibiting a left turn at those locations. So that's sort of one of the key trade-offs to keep in mind with this particular design. So concept B is the bus and managed lane on San Pablo, and looking at parallel streets to accommodate a much enhanced bicycle facility on parallel pathways or residential streets, which I'll get into the bike facility more in a moment. Looking at what would happen on San Pablo itself, this would have very similar conditions in terms of the bus lane, that center running bus lane, the center running transit islands, where loading and unloading of the bus would happen. A lot of the parking is maintained along the side, and there's actually an opportunity for some pedestrian bulb outs that would allow pedestrians to have slightly shorter crossing distance and more visibility for approaching cars. On the side of the street that has the permanent parking lane, on the top side of the slide, that would be the lane that is parking during most of the day, but would convert to a travel lane during the afternoon peak period. This has the same trade-off with the left and right turn lane, that you wouldn't be able to fit a left turn lane, a right turn lane, and a bus island at the same intersection. I will mention that in places like El Cerrito, where there's more this is showing 73, kind of a conceptual 73-foot width. In places in El Cerrito, you actually would be able to fit a bit more, and that would be on an intersection by intersection basis. You'd have to figure out whether you'd allocate that space to parking or to a left turn lane. So I think that's it on concept B. You have these printouts in your packet as well of some of the parallel bike facility options we've looked at. The opportunities for parallel streets to San Pablo that would be good alternatives for bicyclists to San Pablo itself really vary a lot throughout the corridor. In southern Oakland, they are quite poor because the street grid intersects San Pablo at an angle. They get pretty good as you get into North Oakland, into Berkeley. You have the 9th Street Bicycle Boulevard on one side of the street. And then here you see North Berkeley going into Albany and El Cerrito. You have the Ohlone Greenway on the east side of the street, and then you have the Keynes and Adams one couplet that Albany is piloting right now. And then the El Cerrito is looking at their complete streets plan that would potentially add bike lanes to San Pablo. As you get further up, it gets a little bit more, as again the street grid gets more irregular. The parallel bikeway opportunities fall apart a bit. And as you get up into San Pablo, any sort of parallel network that's truly a parallel alternative to San Pablo is not really available. So we aren't just looking at keeping those parallel streets the way they are today, but paired with this project of making improvements on San Pablo would actually be making real improvements to make those into real neighborhood greenways, improving striping and lighting and any sort of traffic calming to make them true, optimal kind of bicycle boulevard type of facilities. So if we went with a concept that did not have a treatment for bicyclists on San Pablo, we would be looking at improving parallel routes with these types of improvements. So concept C looked at what we could achieve for the bus without actually dedicating a lane. So you will see there's none of those red dedicated bus lanes in this diagram. It does have the bicycle facility on the side. Again, this would be a protected bicycle facility with some sort of vertical separation from traffic. This one also, at 73-foot width, would be required to remove a lot of the parking. It has about the same parking impacts that the first concept we looked at does. So there'd be some parking preserved mid-block on one side of the street. The transit islands would be pulled out from the curb, so the bus would actually stop in the travel lane to pick up passengers, so it wouldn't have to pull into the curb and out of the curb again. So it would have a transit station that's separate from the curb itself, so that helps a bit with bus performance. And I think that's just about it for concept C. So one of the biggest findings from our evaluation of these three concepts that we've done at this stage is that the bus lane does make a big difference in terms of bus performance. So that concept C definitely had slower travel times for the bus and less reliability than the ones that actually dedicated a lane to the bus, as you would expect. There is auto diversion from San Pablo. If you go down to one auto lane in each direction, there will be significantly less auto traffic on San Pablo itself. So some of those people might decide to make some other type of trip, make it at another time of day, go by another mode. We are seeing some mode shift with those alternatives where more people are taking the bus or potentially biking or walking. But some of that traffic will also be going to parallel facilities. So there will be likely some additional traffic on some streets that are parallel to San Pablo that are really good alternatives to San Pablo, and some traffic that is going to stay on I-80 that might be choosing to go on San Pablo today. I-80 will continue to be a better alternative for real long distance through trips. The other thing to mention about the bikeway on San Pablo is that it is, although it would be an improvement over conditions today where there's no bike facility in many parts of the corridor, it wouldn't be a truly fully low-stress facility because and I'll actually go back and show this. I didn't really point it out, particularly on concept A. You'll see in the right turn lane, the bicycle facility actually has to mix with the right turn. There isn't enough width at station locations to preserve the bicycle facility all the way through the intersection. So that mixing zone for bicyclists does create a higher stress environment than would be optimal on a major arterial like this. So although it would be an improvement, it's not a truly low stress, all ages and abilities type of facility. The final thing to mention on the bike connectivity is that none of these are necessarily going to be the same treatment throughout the entire corridor. So the best option for a bike facility might be an off-street facility in some parts of the corridor where a really high-quality option exists that wouldn't create much diversion for bicyclists away from San Pablo, and a facility on San Pablo in some areas where a parallel facility is not really an option. So we know that the same treatment, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, that we're going to take concept A and apply it for the whole corridor from Oakland all the way to San Pablo. So we know that there might be a hybrid of these concepts that ultimately is the project that we ended up advancing. So just in terms of next steps of where we're going with this project, we're in a big round of public engagement right now that we're wrapping up the end of this month. We have an online survey. I have some postcards here that have the online survey link if you want to take them with you, if you have not already filled it out. That will be closing at the end of this month. We're doing 4 community workshops. 3 of them have already been completed. We have one in Berkeley coming up this Thursday. That'll be our final community workshop. We're also tabling at events and doing intercept surveys. So we've been soliciting input from groups like yours throughout Alameda County and Contra Costa, trying to get input from as many people as possible on these 3 kind of big alternative visions for which direction the corridor could take, so that we can figure out which of those is worthy of taking into the next stage of more detailed project development and refinement, where we would start looking block by block and seeing what the most appropriate treatments at each intersection is. So after we compile all this input, we will be identifying next steps this summer to try and move into further project development later this year. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
All right.
Yeah.
Any members have questions? Bill?
As an alternative route past the end of the Richmond, the Ohlone Greenway, which of course ends at Baxter Creek Park, from that point, there is, not heavily used, but there is the I-80 bikeway, which used to go to the Rodeo Transit Center. I'm not sure what happens at the end now. I haven't taken it for a while. Have you considered that as a parallel route?
No.
You might want to check that out then.
Okay, great. Thanks for the suggestion.
All right. Paul?
Just wanted to clarify a few things on
Yeah.
the concept B, the managed lane. I'm assuming that's in both directions. You'll manage the curbside management lane,
So we would,
parking.
right now, what we looked at at this stage was a southbound, the parking would be permanent. So there would be one lane all times of day,
So the morning commute would only have one lane.
one lane. So just the one side we would, and that was partially to preserve some parking all the time.
But you're only preserving parking on one side of the road,
Correct.
where
So
some of the need, I'm sure, would be on the other side of the road in some places. Okay.
correct.
Okay, and then, what was my other question? Anyways, we'll come back to that. Thank you.
All right. Eric?
Quick question. I'm assuming you guys have transit information, ridership information along San Pablo Avenue. Is it pretty high use right now?
Yeah, it's one of AC Transit's largest or highest ridership corridors. So the 72 series, the M, the R, and the 72 local combined is one of the highest ridership in AC Transit's system in terms of on a corridor.
Which would be, and I'm trying to think of what's a good way to gauge it. Would I say kind of safe to say that the buses are, 60% full, 70% most of the time during commute hours? I mean, what does that mean from a...
So there's like 14,000 riders a day on that series of buses. To give you some perspective.
And do they know from origin destination? I know you mentioned that a third of the trips have no origin or destination within the study corridor, but where are these people going generally? To the various BART stations or?
So all over. Some are major through trips that are very obviously using this as an alternative to I-80. Some are going to downtown Berkeley, where this is sort of a convenient way to get along San Pablo for a while, and then they turn up to Berkeley. Those were sort of the most dominant, is from out of the region to somewhere out of the region,
Right.
really alternative to I-80, and then going to other neighborhoods in Berkeley. But it's pretty diverse. It's hard to sort of distill it down into a couple, dominant patterns.
Right.
All right. Bruce?
I'm glad to see you did this study. The study needed to be done. If I could suggest, the bus bike lanes are very important. So much as I like to see concept C, a bike lane all along, I cannot see my way clear to suggest that that would be a good option because it doesn't include the buses. We as transportation decision makers have to either paint or get off the ladder, to use a idiom, and I would like to say that concept with the parallel bike facility would be acceptable to me, except this, as you described it, there isn't going to be any parallel bike facility. We're just going to talk about it, and then we're going to shrug our shoulders, and the bicyclists will be gone. So I cannot accept that alternative either, personally, because it's not an alternative. So in my opinion, the only logical option we have is Concept A, the bus and bike lane on San Pablo Avenue. The motorists are going to hate it. And unfortunately, mixing the bicyclists and the right-turning cars is, as you said, not a low-stress option, but it appears that it's our only option. I'm willing to be convinced otherwise of a better option, but you guys are the professionals. You did the study. These are the options we got, and I just killed 2 of them, so in my opinion, we're stuck with 1.
All right, Paul?
Yes, well, thank you, Bruce. I somewhat agree with him that I like concept A. Again, the vehicle level of service is a concern, as well as the stress of the bicyclists. I'm wondering, though, again, the assumption was that there was going to be no right-of-way takes on this project. What if we did look at right-of-way takes at the intersections to allow for this, for a bike lane at those right turn lanes? Was that considered?
So we didn't consider it because pedestrians are such a major need group on the corridor, and if anything, pedestrian traffic with growth, especially the type of growth that's happening, which is a lot of kind of mixed-use development that has more residents on the street and also just more ground-level uses that are going to attract people who are walking, even if they're walking from their parked car to this, or from their parked bicycle, or from the bus stop. We didn't want to reduce the space for pedestrians because that's the most vulnerable user of the roadway. So that's the reason that we sort of set that firmly. The sidewalks through most of the corridor are about as narrow as you would want them to be for a high pedestrian area. There are a couple areas that have wider sidewalks, but as a sort of a general principle throughout the corridor, the sidewalks seemed at sort of at the minimum you would want them to be.
But again, so for such a large project, why was the assumption that no right-of-way takes was, I mean, I don't know if there's buildings or structures in the way, but usually at corners, there's maybe an opportunity to obtain right-of-way.
So if there were, let's say, redevelopment of parcels on corners, like I know at Ashby and San Pablo, Berkeley, at one of the parcels or a couple of the parcels redeveloped, and they were actually able to get some additional sidewalk space, and it freed up some things that they could do at that intersection. It's really on a parcel by parcel level of when redevelopment happens. So in terms of consistent facilities throughout the corridor, we couldn't really count on that happening.
Okay, I'm glad you said case-by-case basis, but
Yeah.
I'm not convinced redevelopment has to occur. I believe you can still do a partial right-of-way take on an existing parcel that's fully developed. You can still possible. We did that in Pittsburgh. Partial right-of-way takes, as long as it's not affecting structures and things like that.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's something to consider.
yeah, tool in the toolbox.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Eric?
I understand you guys are right now very conceptual stage. You guys
Yeah.
are doing your public outreach. I mean, just by experience, I think we've all done it to a certain degree. Ultimately, it's going to be based on a lot of it based on what you can actually sell to the public and the various council members, what they're willing to accept, not just what's looking good on paper. But with that said, you guys are partially into the public outreach process? Is that right?
We're wrapping it up the end of this month. So
This month?
we have the workshop this week. The survey wraps up early next week, and then we're going to be summarizing all the outreach results next week, basically.
Okay. How are things looking from that perspective, general feedback? Any major category of complaints, concerns?
So A and B are more popular than C, although C has been, some people favor C.
Sure.
There is definitely concern about removing travel lanes and parking.
Would that be the main concern?
I would say that's the 2 biggest ones we've heard, yeah.
Okay.
There is, from the bicycling community, we've heard a lot from our Alameda County BPAC and our Bike East Bay about whether there's even better bike conditions that could be achieved in Concept A, like no mixing zones. And again, at the next stage, every intersection is completely different. Like there might be opportunities to do, right-of-way takes at some places where the actual building doesn't go right up to the edge of the sidewalk. And that's really for the next stage to see what we can do at every single intersection. There might be opportunities that we can't identify at a conceptual level, sort of a conceptual universal level. So I would also say that from the bicycling community that there have been concerns about the parallel facilities. There are some parts of the corridor where there are really viable facilities, sort of the central part. And we actually heard that a lot of people use those today and don't need a facility on San Pablo. But at the northern and southern end, we've heard a lot of concern about there not being a facility on San Pablo because there aren't great alternatives. So I would say those are the only other ones that we've heard really from the bicycling perspective.
How many people that you've gotten input from so far?
Last I checked, and this was a couple weeks ago, we had 2,500 survey responses. And so it's probably up. We've had 2 more workshops since then, so it's probably up closer to 3,000 or so. So that is fantastic. We did not expect to get that much. There's definitely a lot of interest in the project. Right. All our workshops have been pretty well attended. We've got a lot of input from people, kind of stopping people on the street, the intercept surveys. So I don't have a final number, but I would say thousands of people have been engaged on the project.
Would you say is an even distribution between transit riders, bicycle commuters versus drivers?
So we are looking at that. We're actually just starting to get into summarizing the survey results right now to see, because on the survey you actually indicate what your user group is. We know that there's a couple groups that are less inclined to take an online survey, so transit riders and seniors and people with disabilities. So we actually did focus groups with those 2 groups that we specifically recruited people that could represent those 2 groups. So we recruited 72 series riders, and we've done a focus group in Contra Costa County and a focus group in Alameda County with those riders to make sure that we aren't underrepresenting that user group in the survey results, which are they tend to not be as well represented. And seniors and people with disabilities as well. We did a Contra Costa and an Alameda focus group with those people who represent those user groups.
What about business owners?
Yeah, we've also done several merchant focus groups, and we have another one coming up this Thursday. And we've also had definitely some merchant turnout to some of our workshops.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Bill?
A couple of things. One is in terms of feedback. I was at the El Cerrito meeting, and there's a lot of vitriol on the part of drivers who just don't want, and merchants who just don't want to give up that extra lane or the parking. So it's a fairly big hurdle that we have to think about. My other reaction is I disagree with Bruce a little bit. If the parallel streets are well marked, and I mean we've got to have really good signage, and at least marked as class 3s, then I think it's a little more viable. But I agree with him that it's very easy for bicyclists to get marginalized in this. And, of course, some kind of blend of parallel streets, and, it's ideal for us to be separate. Either we have a protected bike lane or a Class 1 lane. And here, of course, the significant one is the Ohlone Greenway. Now, if we can work out a system where we can connect with that without too much back and forth, then that might be a viable alternative if there's great signage.
Yep.
And only if.
All right, Bruce?
A follow-on to my esteemed colleague, I'd like to see if we have parallel facilities on each side.
Oh, yeah. We are, as you'll see in the diagrams, we've identified at least an option for both sides of the corridor where they exist. In some places, they only exist on one side, really a good option. But we're definitely looking at both sides. We recognize people, looking at all the origins and destinations, people are coming from both sides and going to both sides.
Okay, so if we have a parallel option on only one side, then in the hybrid design, we would want a bike lane on the opposite side. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that's, again, sort of a, for the next stage of design, if there were some real constraint points where a parallel facility was only possible on one side, we'd have to look at what would happen on the other side.
Right. We
Yeah.
don't want the network to stop and
Yeah.
restart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fear we're going to get the hybrid. We want to get the best hybrid we can get.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, Tony?
Hi. Yeah, so the question to me is what the destination is, and you say most of the car drivers don't want to be there anyway, by the sounds of things, or a lot of them don't want to be on that road. They're trying to get through to somewhere else. And for me, most cyclists, I don't know about bus riders, but they are more local journeys and probably want to get to somewhere on San Pablo. So to me, the emphasis should be on allowing cyclists to access it and bus riders to access it. So I totally disagree with C being a good option just because it's focusing on cars who shouldn't be there. And if the cyclists are heading somewhere else, maybe a parallel route would work for them. But in my experience, cyclists want to be where their life is and they're trying to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So the thing that concerns me about the cycle lane option is that there are soft barriers separating the cars and the cyclists. And if I was with kids, my kids would be that soft barrier, maybe cycling along there. So a more rigid curb or something to make it safer and encourage families to use those cycleways, I think would be important.
Okay.
How do the buses work as well? I'm curious, when you get off on the other side.
Say again?
When you have to get off on the other side of the bus.
Yeah, so these would require buses that have dual side boarding, so doors on both sides of the
Do they have
the
those
vehicle.
already?
They are, they're doing a similar project on International in Oakland, down to San Leandro Bart, and they are procuring that kind of bus for that project, because it also has both sideboarding, like in downtown Oakland, it's sideboarding, but they'll have center running platforms for much of the corridor. So they are in the process of getting those now. These won't be the first in their fleet.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I know we have additional items on the agenda here, so I'd like to make sure we get to those. So unless anybody else has any other, questions, I'd like to move on, if that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Should I leave does anyone want a postcard with the survey link? Okay, I'll leave a handful of these then. I'll just leave these. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your input. And happy Bike to Work Month.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 5, project status update for the McCollum Trail. We'll receive an informational presentation regarding this project status.
Thank you, Chair. This presentation will be presented by Stephanie Hu, one of our senior engineers. It'll be available momentarily.
There, just don't want to forget that. I wouldn't make sure.
Oh, sorry, here. All right. See if this works. Okay, great. Okay. Good morning, CBPAC members. My first time here, so I'm happy to see you all, and I'm happy to give an update on Bruce's project. I'm calling it Overcrossing for Bikes and Ped in Brentwood. So just a project location. The project's located in Brentwood, as shown on the map. It is located south of Lone Tree Way, which is on top here. If I can you see that? No. Anyway, top of Lone Tree right there. So south of that and north of Sand Creek Road, that's to the south. So the project proposes to bridge a gap in the trail at the center circle right there. That's bisected by Highway 4. Just for knowledge, the McCallamy Trail is actually called the McCallamy Coast to Crest Trail. There's an effort by a nonprofit, it's called McCallamy Coast to Crest Trail Council, that is trying to create a trail that goes from the San Francisco Bay Area all the way to the Sierras. The red is the proposed portions, and the green are the completed. So there's a huge chunk that's not completed, but that's their endeavor to kind of have this trail that goes all the way from where we are to the Sierras. And our project here, just a small piece of the missing link. So this is a closer view of the existing trail, as you will see today. Again, it's bisected by Highway 4. On the right-hand side, right north of those homes there, it's an existing trail that ends. You see that white area, that's a CCWD Water District's facility, is a huge concrete wall. So if we do a Google view, that lawn there in the middle, there's a black path, that's where it ends. And into the horizon, that white spot, that's where the wall is. So the trail kind of ends there on the east side. And then on the west side, it's just similar, where the trail kind of goes all the way sort of to the highway and it ends. And while you're driving on eastbound 4, in the picture shown on the right hand, if you look to the west side, driving eastbound, you see sort of a paved area, and that's where the trail ends. And in the distance, you can see a fence. So that's where the trail ends. So again, our project is trying to span over this gap, which is Highway 4. So just a little background. The trail, or the POC, was actually a planned project in the bypass project, as it was a mitigation measure listed in the EIR for the bypass project. The POC project was put on hold in 2014 after we completed a 65% design because we ran out of money. During the project's hiatus, the city of Brentwood actually started a specific plan effort for an area called Priority Area 1. And this specific plan, which was adopted last year in November, identifies the area directly adjacent to the pedestrian overcrossing as the future Brentwood Transit Center. So this development, or this goal of having a transit center, actually made this POC even more important. Not only will it bridge the gap in the trail, it will also serve as an access to the transit center. And then also, another development was BART. In their next segment study, they identified the area in this POC area as a potential station if eBART was to extend further east past the new Antioch station. And so they stepped up and provided us some extra money to complete the design. First, they contributed $200,000 from their general fund. And then with Transplant's concurrence, they also gave another $150,000 from their BART Measure J program money to the effort. So totaling $350,000. So that gave us what we needed to complete the design. And also AGRIFA, the East Contra Costa Regional Fee and Financing Authority, has also is supporting us for the right-of-way effort. So they're doing the right-of-way services as well as the acquisition. So they're taking care of the acquisition costs. So this is a layout of our proposed trail. The new trail will be approximately 2,600 feet long, with the bridge being 850 feet long. So the bridge, the structure is shown in brown or dark orange, and while the yellowy area, those are at grade or at fill. You will see the existing trail follows the East Bay Mutt right-of-way utility corridor. I don't have a pointer, so it's kind of hard. Basically, you see those dashed lines. It'd be nice to have a clicker, but so the POC, the structure avoids being in this East Bay Mutt corridor because there are 3 large aqueducts structure in there. And also on the east side, you see the trail kind of goes up and around. That's where the wall structure is. That's owned by the water district, which we also needed to avoid. And then, as mentioned, there will be a future transit center, which is the parcel on the bottom left. The vision is to have it serve buses in the interim. As you know, it'll take a while for BART to extend or have an extension. So the goal is to have it serve buses before BART ever gets down to this area. And our project, the POC project, will pave a dirt path. There's a leader there called Grading to Connect to Future Transit Center. So it's just going to be a dirt path that provides an access or connection to the transit center. And then when the transit center project comes on board, they can refine the grading and pave it. And also to note is the bridge. The bridge itself is not to preclude accommodating BART. The idea or the concept would be perhaps in the future the bridge will serve as an access point to a median station, similar to the Pittsburgh Civic Center or Pittsburgh Center BART station, where the access is down a bridge with this elevator going down to the median. So the bridge was designed to not preclude that option. And that means having a wider section on the bridge of 16-foot width to accommodate bicyclists, pedestrians, and also passengers that might be going to or from the BART station or e-BART station. And also the 16-foot wide section goes further to the east. There are two parcels north. One is north of the trail and then south of the trail that could be potential parking lots if BART comes through. So the sections of the trail is wider there also to provide some connections in the future. And then another piece of information for the structure is also that the loading accommodates a heavy armor truck if there were needs to unload massive amount of cash from ticketing machines. And then and also conduits in the structure to provide connections for utilities and whatnot. The colors, so the yellow are just the temporary construction easement areas, and then the cyan and purple are the acquisitions, property acquisitions that we're working on. And then those little red areas are just easements from the irrigation district and water district. So hopefully you can see this. Okay, so sections, just again, the width of the bridge will be 16 foot wide. Everywhere else will be 12. And then areas where we're conforming back to existing will vary between 10 to 12. That's what the existing width of the trail is right now. And then just give you a feel of the profile. The steepest grade is at 4.9%, so that's meeting ADA standards. And you'll see those larger pipes. Those are the aqueducts that I was speaking of. So you see the structure avoids those aqueducts, while some areas at grade the trail will be above it, which is not a problem. And we've been coordinating with East Bay Mud on all of this and getting the appropriate paperwork and permits and whatnot. So moving forward, we completed the 100% design back in March, so we're still receiving comments from Caltrans and different stakeholders, and East Bay Regional Park District receives a set of plan, and we sent it to Sean Dugan. Also the city, obviously. So we're getting comments at this point from the key stakeholders. The construction cost is estimated to be about $8 million. Our director of construction and his team has completed a constructability review, and we are currently facilitating a maintenance agreement with that will be between Caltrans and City of Brentwood, which was actually a sort of a significant feat. It was hard for Caltrans to take the maintenance of the entire POC. Normally, they only maintain the portions inside the right-of-way, but given that the city is not they're not able to be accountable for the entire structure, and then we see that the structure is one, they need to, if they're going to maintain a portion, they should take the entire, and to be responsible for the integrity of the structure. And then the city will come in and be responsible for everything above deck, such as, lighting when there will be lighting, if there will be lighting in the future, graffiti and trash. So currently, the right-of-way and funding are driving the schedule. Right-of-way, Aquifer staff is working on the acquisition and also appraisal process. And for funding, the Transit Center as a whole is actually listed in the Regional Measure 3 project list, and it's receiving $15 million for the Transit Center. So 5 of the 15 is dedicated to the POC project. And then the staff is actively trying to bridge the gap of, extra $3 million to complete the construction phase. And then our hope is hopefully go to construction this summer of 2020. That's next summer. And then with that, that's my end of presentation, and happy to get any questions and try to answer them. And also to save paper, I don't have this provided in hard copy, but happy to email you guys PDFs of this if you like. So.
Thank you, Stephanie. Actually, just procedurally, James, should I take committee comments first or public comment on this item?
I think if you'd like to take the public comment, it can be incorporated into the discussion by the committee.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I have one speaker card here from Leah Greenblatt, representing WICTAC.
Hi. I just had a question about the process for the project and whether it has or will be going to the Caltrans District for Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee, because they have a lot of very knowledgeable representatives on there. And
yeah, so because this is a peer project, we are in the state right away. We do give, we have to go through their formal process just like a regular Caltrans highway project. So it goes through their different units.
But they have a citizen advisory committee, a bicycle advisory committee and a pedestrian advisory committee.
I can check and make sure they did pass the plans to that committee. We have a liaison, there's a project manager on the Caltrans side, so I'll ask him if he thinks that would be a good idea to do so.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, now we'll go to committee comments. Bill?
I think love the idea of the project, et cetera. Thinking about that really nice bike bridge in Berkeley that crosses I-80, it was way over budget and wound up to be somewhere between $5 and $10 million bucks. I think maybe closer to 5. Are you pretty confident about the figures of the costs in this?
Yeah, I believe so. We had a couple iterations. We started, it has been going up, so I know we're tracking, the markets, for construction costs and whatnot. We started at maybe around 6, and then this last 100% design review, PSNE, the estimate went up to 8. So I think it's been reviewed and looked at and refined as we have moved towards to final.
Good. Glad to hear it. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
All right, Bruce?
Yeah, I've been bird dogging this project for a long time. I can say one paragraph about the history of it. Okay, the EIR said that the 3 regional trails that were crossed by the freeway had to have the freeway build crossings for the trail. That's a convoluted statement, but we got to cross, okay? The Marsh Creek Trail was crossed with the bridge of the freeway over Marsh Creek. The canal had to go under the freeway, and the Delta de Anza Trail followed the canal maintenance road, so it went under without any of the political machinations having anything to do with it. But this trail, the McCollum Aqueduct Trail, needed a separate structure because the aqueduct is under the ground and you can just build the freeway right over the aqueduct, okay? In 2001, the chair of the Highway 4 Bypass Authority, Don Freitas, said in the meeting, when staff presented a resolution to authorize the construction of a 9-foot tall by 14-foot wide concrete undercrossing, just build the concrete, dump dirt on each side, and the freeway will go over the top of it. Okay, staff presented this, and Don said, and I quote, "I cannot see my way clear to spend motorist money on bicycle facilities." And so he put the kibosh on this resolution, and that was the end of that. Staff immediately went into CYA mode and went to the recreation guy in the city of Brentwood and gave a memorandum of understanding saying, as soon as we didn't build a crossing facility because you guys haven't built the trail up to each side of the freeway. So we're just going to build the freeway. But, this is in writing, within 1 year of you guys building the bike trail up to the edge of the freeway, we will build a bike pedestrian bridge. Okay, so 2 years later, the city of Brentwood had the trail segments up to pretty darn close. But as you can see, here we are, 2001, 2019, we're still talking about building it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Actually, Stephanie, I had just for clarification, which parts of the trail are going to be like 10 to 12 feet, and which parts are 16? Yeah.
So you can see, well, the bridge itself is definitely 16. So you go at either side. I'll start from the west side. It's a very small portion where it transitions back. So I think that's the 10 to 12 feet on the left-hand side. Majority would be 10 to 12. But on the right-hand side, or the east side, as you get off the bridge, there's actually a longer piece that's yellow that's still 16 because eventually there might be parking lots on either side. So 16 feet is required to create some kind of connection that will go either like down a staircase or some kind of path that will go north or south to these parking lots. So there'll be more of the 16 wide section on the east side. And you can kind of tell with the narrowing.
I guess just to follow up to that, you're planning the width based, if BART's going to come there. Like once, say BART does open up there, is there going to be any separation between yes. I think the 16-foot came about in talking to BART and having some kind of ridership estimate, and there's some math that I don't recall, but yeah, there was some information that BART provided in terms of ridership that this station would generate, probably similar to Hillcrest or maybe Railroad Station. The 16 was adequate, they thought. And yeah, I think once it opens, then there'll be consideration of separating bike and ped. Not a hard separation, I think perhaps just striping, but that could be determined at that time. Yeah, just like if I'm a bicyclist. Yeah,
right, it's wide enough where you could.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, any other questions by committee? Okay, all right. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, we'll move to item 6 here. We'll have lunch, and what's a good time to reconvene, James?
Yeah, I think even though lunch indicates 11:50 at 12:05 right now, I think if the committee's agreeable, we can have lunch in about 10 minutes and reconvene back on schedule at 12:15.
All right, I'd like to reconvene the Countywide Bike and Ped Advisory Committee. The next item on the agenda is item number 7, the draft scope of work for priority implementation action items from the 2018 Countywide Bike and Ped Plan. And there's the authority has prioritized 3 action items to implement. I think James will go over them. Correct? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. You may recall, or those of you who were in attendance or followed the meeting, the last meeting from the CBPAC was in September of 2018, so about 8 or 9 months ago. But at that time, the authority board had just completed a review of implementation actions from the Countywide Bike Ped Plan, which was actually adopted last July. So this is really, we're launching into the process of finding effective ways to implement the plan. And at the time, last fall, the board identified 3 priority items that this committee then met to discuss outlines or approaches that staff could take to develop potential scopes of work on how to actually accomplish these action items. And in the staff report in your packet, the first page, 7-1, it lists the 3 priority action items, the first being to help develop a coordinated approach to bike share and scooter share. That should be amended to say scooter share as well in Contra Costa. And secondly, to conduct a pedestrian needs assessment. Thirdly, to develop a Vision Zero system framework. And greater detail is provided on the subsequent pages as to what each of those tasks could entail. Starting with the first one in developing a coordinated approach to bike and scooter share in this county, the deliverable, if you will, on this is envisioned as a forum that would take place most likely here, and it could occur in this particular room or perhaps another room in this building where we've successfully hosted planning director seminars that with an invitation to all the jurisdictions and even members of the public to help provide direction on what the future countywide transportation plan might look like. In this case, it would be an information exchange in which CCTA staff could invite other agency staff, such as from ACCC, someone like Kathleen or her colleagues, or perhaps from across the bay in San Francisco, where they have quite a bit of experience with bike and scooter share, and even here in Contra Costa for those jurisdictions that have had some perhaps relatively limited experience in this arena. And so essentially, this is building on the fact that the Countywide Bike Ped Plan and staff, and I believe this committee and the public recognize bike and scooter share are a growing phenomenon. And provided also in this packet is an attachment that is a report from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO, and they provide basically an annual update on the state of quote-unquote micro-mobility, and that includes the bike and scooter share sectors. And so this would be what staff foresees as a proactive approach to developing not only exchanging information, but also developing ideas on how local jurisdictions may, if they have not already, may better prepare for an eventual market shift where these become more prevalent in this county. It's not to say that they will at the same rate as other counties, but we think that this is in line with effective transportation planning efforts. And obviously the board thinks so as well. So a scope of work is outlined beginning, it's actually attachment A, beginning on 7-5. And it includes the summary approach, which I basically just described. And in terms of procurement, we actually think that this would be primarily staff time. We do have on-call consulting services that could assist intermittently, but we think it would be more nominal. And the time, we have about 4 major tasks outlined here, with completion targeted for November of this year. This would essentially be the first task undertaken. It's also basically the smallest scope of the three that we'll discuss here, because it is more of a because it is a form and it's not as much in the way of quantitative analysis and that type of work. So I'll proceed to the second and third priority action items, and then be happy to take questions on details. The second priority action item that is outlined for a scope of work is to conduct a pedestrian needs assessment. And there was comment by the authority board at the time they adopted this countywide bike ped plan that there's quite a bit of rich data regarding the bicycle network, but perhaps less so on the pedestrian side. And even though there are, for example, pedestrian collision density maps that basically are heat maps for where there are safety concerns, this pedestrian needs assessment could take things a step further and actually identify corridors and or major intersections where pedestrian needs could be addressed in a more specific manner, whether that's enhancing certain facilities or even just the context, such as the lighting or landscaping and buffering, if you will. And it would also include an order of magnitude cost to actually implement pedestrian enhancements. And staff has identified an effort that this agency undertook about 5 years ago in 2014. It's the Contra Costa Safe Routes to School Needs Assessment. And that could serve, we wouldn't necessarily be seeking to replicate that verbatim, but it could serve as a model for how we approach this pedestrian needs assessment. And that is also attached in this packet as a frame of reference for this group. It is attachment 2, starting on page 7-45. And as far as the scope of work and the timing goes, this would require consultant support. And we believe that we could accomplish this in terms of a final report or needs assessment by next spring. So it would be about a year from now. And the reason for that is to space out and make sure that we can accumulate the requisite data. We believe that an appropriate scope would include interaction with the local jurisdictions to make sure there are no duplicative efforts, but if efforts have already been undertaken by certain cities, for example, we could leverage that information and incorporate that and supplement each other in that way. And then thirdly, to develop a Vision Zero and systematic safety approach for Contra Costa. As this committee may be aware, Vision Zero is a philosophical or paradigm shift in transportation planning and traffic engineering that traces its origin to Sweden in the late 90s and has since taken hold as official policies adopted in major cities like San Francisco, San Jose, more mid-sized cities such as San Luis Obispo and Pasadena in California at least, and then there are more than a dozen others across the nation. And in this case, staff is envisioning, and again, these scopes are based on feedback from this committee as well as the board, and the Vision Zero framework would be something that could be overseen by a working group. So a working group could be established specific to this purpose. Perhaps it would involve one or two members of this committee and maybe some others from other jurisdictions who would help. And that would be to be determined as we flesh out the scope of work. But ultimately to develop a white paper or basically a document that could provide guidelines on how to implement and actually adopt Vision Zero policies and practices for local jurisdictions. So it would include, it would follow a similar task or a similar pace to the pedestrian needs assessment, although it would take a little bit different tone. It would probably incorporate more presentations with, say, the regional transportation planning committees And it still to be determined as well whether this would become a countywide Vision Zero policy, or at this point we think it might be more reasonable, depending on the readiness of certain communities, whether each community will choose to adopt it as they see fit, but ideally under an umbrella of policy that could be applied consistently throughout the county. With that, I hope that overarching summary is sufficient to guide discussion, and we appreciate this committee's feedback on any of the finer points in these scopes of work that have been drafted so far.
All right, any questions from the committee? Bill?
The thing that jumps out at me in the study is the whole issue of scooters, motorized scooters and regular scooters, which, as you know, has been a big issue in a lot of communities these days. At our Bike to Work Energizer station, we went through, debated about, well, let's see, should we count scooters, you know? I think we should develop a policy that has some definite recommendations about the scooters. As you know, bicycles are considered a vehicle with all the rights and requirements of any vehicle. Perhaps we want to think about assessing scooters that way. What was I going to say? Yeah, will they be allowed in bicycle lanes? Will they be allowed? Certainly on sidewalks is a big problem. Bicycles are not allowed on sidewalks. Why should scooters be? And one that really jumps out at me, of course, are the accident problems. Should we encourage the rental companies to rent helmets to people? Should they be required in any way? I don't think that'll happen because, well, motorcyclists are, but bicyclists have never been required to wear helmets. But as speaking as someone who's been hit, it's a very good idea. But perhaps we can develop policy to pressure the companies that rent the scooters. There are far too many accidents, and looking at the study, far too many of those involve head injuries for obvious reasons. So that's a couple of recommendations.
Actually, before I continue with the committee comments, I've actually received a couple of speaker cards here. When you come up, actually, just for procedurally, if you can state your full name and organization. So first one I have here is from Leah.
Hello again. I'm Leah Greenblatt. I'm a program manager at WICTAC. Excuse me, a couple of items. One is our WICTAC TDM manager, Corey Riley, has already started to collect policies related to the bike and scooter issue, I guess, because at WICTAC, our TAC members have already identified this as an issue because we see it coming up San Pablo Avenue corridor. So Corey might serve as a good resource for you on that. Then regarding the other two items or tasks, the needs assessment and the Vision Zero, I'd like to suggest that both of those efforts really look at what future grants are coming down the pipeline and collect information with that in mind and kind of focused on that, because I think I know that at the state level for like ATP grants, Contra Costa really has not been doing that well, where it haven't been very successful. And I think that, a lot of our smaller jurisdictions don't have the resources to put together an ATP type of application. So I think we should be collecting information for this needs assessment that supports the local jurisdictions and the applications. And perhaps part of the scope of work could be modified to include a consultant to help local jurisdictions with grant applications. There's plenty of transportation, even focused grant consultants who can help put together a competitive application. And I know our local staff are challenged in terms of their own time and resources. And I think that would, it's all about getting the money to do the projects ultimately. So I'd like to see that focus.
All right, thank you. Second speaker card I have here is Colin.
Hey there, Colin Peathy with Contra Costa County, Transportation Planner. I want to echo Leah's comments because I think implementation measures should be focused on building the facilities identified in the bike plan. I understand there's a need for more study for the implementation measures you cited, but in the future I would like to see more concrete commitments to actually building the infrastructure that get more people on bikes and walking. For the third one on Vision Zero, Contra Costa County is developing a Vision Zero plan. We're studying doing the collision analysis, but we haven't actually adopted a policy. So we'd like to work together with you guys to develop that framework. And as well, on your comments about the individual jurisdictions adopting Vision Zero, I would encourage a more top-down approach to that too, because in the auto-oriented communities we live in, I think they're going to be more reluctant to do the hard work of taking away road space and prioritizing vulnerable road users. So just pushing forward and say, these are our priorities. We want to protect bicyclists and pedestrians. And those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll go back to the committee here. If any other committee members have comments. Okay, Paul.
I just wanted to mention that the City of Pittsburgh also last year completed a systemic safety analysis citywide that might feed into our Vision Zero effort.
All right, thank you. Bruce?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Bruce Olson, City of Pittsburgh, end user of manually propelled traffic movements, things. I think on the scooter deal, I think that's the future. I went to the MTC Active Transportation Group last Thursday, and they had 2 nationwide scooter operators there who were talking about their big data and sharing, and MTC was nodding and smiling and saying, yeah, the future is scooters. So as trickle down, we should figure in Contra Costa County, yeah, the future is going to be scooters. MTC also had the statistic that more than 50% of all trips taken in the 9 Bay Area counties are under 3 miles. So that's perfect for a scooter, perfect for a bicycle, and everybody from MTC on this committee was nodding and smiling. And yeah, we're going to mode shift from cars into bikes and scooters. So if that's the way they're going, let's expect some money from them to encourage us to do those sorts of things. They also had a statistic about Uber and Lyft saying that from their research, 49% of Uber and Lyft trips took people who would have used transit or walking or biking away from transit, walking, and biking and put them in Uber and Lyft. Okay, so Uber and Lyft are the enemy, it appears to me, although they didn't say that at that meeting. Okay, enough of that. So certainly we should include the scooter companies in any kind of rulemaking that we're going to do. And now on Vision Zero. a lot of Vision Zero has to do with getting the users to behave in such a way as to preserve their own lives. As an illustration, we had a bicyclist death in Pittsburgh. He was wearing dark clothes. He was running at night. He was going in the opposite direction of normal traffic. And he got hit by a car. The guy died. It's very unfortunate. But in there we have to say, well, duh. No lights, dark clothes, running at night, wrong way direction. This is training. Vision Zero is going to have to involve a lot of training on the part of the vulnerable road users, those who get hurt when a car runs into them, it would seem to me. This is not to say that somebody that gets hurt or killed by a car is a bad person. They just either chose to not behave the way they're trained or they didn't have a clue. We need to go after the people who don't have a clue. Thank you.
I just want to add to Bruce's point about Vision Zero. I know there's the emphasis on the engineering improvements, but there's also the educational aspect of it and the enforcement aspect. So I'm hoping when they do this white paper that somehow we get an educational component and an enforcement component included in that. And then switching back to the bike share, scooter share item. I guess I know scooters is like the direction that it's going towards right now, but I think we should also be aware of, just given how quickly this field changes to, anticipate or be creative with like, okay, what do we expect in the future? Because I remember just about a year ago, bike share was all the rage, and now this year it's scooter share, and next year it could be totally something different. So just being, I guess, like I said, creative or flexible with, I guess, future policies, just to be able to, incorporate these other sharing modes or being flexible or pivot towards them. So that's my comment on that. All right,
to supplement what you're saying, I keep hearing the word shared micromobility. I think that's the new term to cover all bases. So I'd like to start using that term. And then I also wanted to mention that City of Pittsburgh also we have an administrative draft that we're reviewing now, but it's our new pedestrian and bicycle plan, and it also incorporates the pedestrian needs in City of Pittsburgh. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments from the committee? All right. James?
Yeah, these are very helpful. I can already see how, it sounds like, and I recognize that education will be a vital component, perhaps for all three of these efforts, but particularly for the Vision Zero, and we'll look forward to incorporating these comments. So thank you for taking the time.
All right, we will move on to, let me flip back here. All right, item number 8, upcoming subjects for discussion. James?
Well, this is an opportunity for the committee to advise staff if there are items that are of particular interest to be addressed. As this committee knows, it meets bi-monthly, so the next opportunity to address an item in this setting would be July. We staff foresee at least 1 or 2 items that will materialize at that time. Still fluid, but if there are others that this committee can think of specifically, we're happy to take those down now. And we're also happy to, by phone or email, if there's interest, we can take them after the fact.
Who's email?
My email is just fine, and I'll be happy to provide cards. Obviously, some of you or all of you, or none of you might have my direct contact at this point, but we'll make sure that that's distributed.
All right, thank you, James. All right, we'll move to item number 9, MTC's Active Transportation Working Group. James?
Thank you again. So as Oli alluded to, I believe you were there in person. I was unable to attend, but I did call in, and attached to this packet is the Active Transportation Working Group agenda from last Thursday, the 16th. It took place at the MTC Bay Area Metro offices in San Francisco, and the theme of this particular meeting was the integration of technology and micromobility in regional transportation planning. There were multiple vendors present, including by name Remix and Populous. Those two are data management and analytics firms that are relatively young. I think they're startups that are less than 5 years old, or maybe even 2 to 3 years old. But they specialize in data services that are actually intended to be public-facing and inform local agency efforts to better plan for not only street design, but also actual movement of these new micromobility services, such as scooters and dockless bikes. And they also advertise the ability to track curb management activities, as well as fleet management, because as some may be aware, there's an increasing number of personal deliveries taking place that aren't always FedEx, but Amazon is obviously quite the mover and shaker in the logistics field these days and in the urban environment. There were also some interesting updates from MTC and a representative from the Southern California Association of Governments in terms of building a more robust bicycle and pedestrian count database. And to my understanding, based on the presentation this summer, they will present more information and even have opportunity for comment. So that may be something that we look into as an item. And City of Fremont also presented a signal priority technology for bicyclists, and they're in a trial right now, and a traffic engineer from City of Fremont talked about the product called SciBike, which I believe is a mashup of Siemens and bike, and they've developed an app, a mobile phone app, where a bicyclist can download it, and then they have an adapter on their signal controllers that when the bicyclist comes into range can actually get a green traffic signal priority, much like a transit priority. They have, I forget the precise number of intersections, but it's more than a handful of intersections that they are piloting this right now in Fremont. And I believe that a more detailed evaluation will take place down the line. And finally, another item of interest is the integration of the Clipper transit card and BikeLink, which, as some of you may be aware, BikeLink has been the primary mode of accessing secure bike lockers at transit stations and or civic centers or areas of interest. And this is particular to BART. BART is trying to integrate Clipper at their bike lockers so that you can use a Clipper card to access those bike lockers. And they did a comparison of different tapping techniques because there's different sensitivities that are the technology is a little bit over my head in terms of how that makes a difference, but they were able to determine that a 2-tap system is better than 3, which I think would be intuitive. But anyway, they have a report available, and if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to forward that to you with their findings. So relatively robust discussion, and I don't know if Oli would like to add any particulars since you were there.
You asked me if I want to speak? Come on, James. No, just kidding. Thank you. Yeah. One of the things that the big data companies spoke about, each of them said, these companies are developing apps for your smartphone that will provide data as to where you ride your bike so that this can be incorporated into planning. I thought that was great, especially given that the city of Fremont now is working on an app. It was 17 traffic signals that they're piloting to. I didn't get so much that it was going to prioritize. It was just going to trigger. I'm here. It's time to change the light whenever you get around to it. To the computer running the thing, rather than saying, "Oh, speed up because there's a bicyclist here." But I might have missed that.
It was based on they provided a marketing material that does advertise the ability that if a bicyclist, if there was already a green phase active on approach, the green phase would hold just a little bit longer if it detects. So it may extend that phase. I don't know what their threshold is based on the number of feet you can cover per second, but basically a green extension.
Okay, yeah, they said extension. They didn't say prioritize. Okay, a minor difficulty. The fact is, if you got a cell phone and you got the app on it, you're going to trigger the light saying, "Yeah, I'm here," and your trip is going to get registered into big data so it can be collected into the big picture of how people get around. So I thought both of those things were quite interesting and fun. Might even convince me to get a smartphone.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to item number 10, other business information sharing. Does any committee members want to share anything? All right, Bill.
Just to say that, excuse me, that Bike to Work Day was very successful. We had 140 Energizer stations in the East Bay alone, I believe. And Dave Campbell the other day of Bike East Bay told me that there were 90,000 riders this year that got counted. Pretty amazing. The other thing that just occurred to me was, and believe me, I don't have stock in this company, but there's an outfit called Track Track with a capital R when you search them. And they have a little GPS device. It's very thin, very small. And you stick it on your bike somewhere, hopefully hidden, and there's an app. And so if your bike gets stolen, you can look on the app where it is and tell the cops, "Hey, it's in this guy's house." I'm paranoid about my bike, and if any of you others are, it's inexpensive. I don't know, it's $15, $20 or something. But well, anyway, FYI.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Bruce?
I'd like to, on behalf of the entire committee, welcome James as our new staff member. Yes. Thank you very much for applying when Brad retired, and you're going to do a great job, I know, and I think we all know. So thanks for being here for us.
Yes, thank you.
I'd also like to add, also Jackie as well, providing support. I know it's your first meeting here, so thank you as well. All right, any other comments?
Chair, if I may.
Okay, James.
So from the staff side, just wanted to alert the committee that in the future, the agenda will look a little bit different just in layout. We're going to cover the same topics and still look to receive feedback from this advisory committee on active transportation matters. But we are in the process of updating some of our systems here at CCTA as far as administrative and meeting organization. So just more of an FYI. And for example, we may or we won't necessarily be tying items to a specific time. So we'll be more consistent with other agendas that we distribute here, where it's just the items and the recommendation and so on. So and then also to alert the committee that staff are in discussion with some of the regional transportation commission committees about confirming or inviting new appointments to this particular committee. And the reason for that is because some of our administrative paperwork is slightly outdated, so we apologize. But that's not to say that, changes are necessarily imminent. We just need to solidify some of that. So we're talking to WICTAC, for example, and we're going to get in touch with SWAT, for example, just to make sure that we have the sufficient number of representatives plus an alternate. Because as you can see, there are a couple empty chairs here for different reasons. Some couldn't make it, but also we need one or two extra bodies on the roster. So that is the update from staff.
James, just like to add to that. Yeah, I was, I guess, CC'd on those emails to WICTAC regarding the representative and alternates. Yeah, I think that's, something maybe to be addressed. I saw in the bylaws that, I guess, for the RTPCs, there is no alternate. The only one who gets an alternate is the county.
Well, when we reviewed the administrative information that we have, including the bylaws, there's typically a staff and citizen representative from each of the 4 RTPCs, plus one staff alternate, just for coverage. So in this case, due to turnover, either staff departing or moving places, I believe SWAT, I believe they don't have a current staff alternate. And, that's just something to clean up.
Actually, and one other comment. I guess if you also could let the RTP committee members, CBPAC members know, and the RTPCs, I know it's a 2-year term. If you could let us know, the date, the month, when we were supposed to, re-up our membership or representative to the CBPAC, that would be great as well.
Yeah, I think what could happen is I could produce an email memo to cover everyone and all the RTPCs, just to alert everyone to what the status is. That way everybody knows.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, Bill?
Just one quick comment. I really enjoy serving on this committee. About my only frustration is that, this may sound like I don't know, a lot of people would not go along with this, but that we don't have very many meetings. And of course, when we look at today, the last meeting minutes were in September. I don't mind it if we do a little more work. Now, I understand that, sometimes there just isn't work to do, and, naturally you don't want to have a meeting with one item and bring everybody out and so on. But I don't know, just keep that in back of your mind and see if I don't know, see if there's going to be more work for us. I prefer that.
Actually, regarding that, I'm curious, James, will our committee be meeting, more as scheduled regularly, or maybe even more in light of the fact that there's a TEP that's being developed over the next few months?
I believe, I don't know, I can't say particularly whether the TEP will drive more meetings, but I can say with relative confidence that just based on these implementation items and also some regional efforts such as at District 4, they are updating a district-wide pedestrian plan. We may have an opportunity to provide comments on that in the near future. So I believe these bi-monthly meetings are going to become quite regular as currently scheduled. And so I, at least, for one, don't foresee deviating from that schedule for the remainder of the year.
All right. If There's no further comments. We'll just move to item 11, which is adjourned. Our next meeting date is scheduled for Monday, July 22, 2019 at 11 a.m. All right, thank you.